The bulldozer's engine roared to life as Sarah Martinez watched her neighbor's pristine pool crumble into concrete chunks. Mrs. Henderson screamed from her kitchen window, phone pressed to her ear, 911. He's destroying my property. But as the police sirens wailed closer, Sarah pulled out a weathered deed from 1987, her hands trembling with 37 years of buried rage. The woman who'd stolen her childhood, ruined her family, and claimed ownership of everything she touched was about to learn the most devastating truth of all. The land beneath that gleaming pool had never been hers to begin with. The morning sun cast long shadows across Maple Street as Sarah Martinez gripped the steering wheel of her pickup truck, watching the excavation crew unload their equipment. 37 years. 37 years since she'd last set foot on this property, and now she was back to reclaim what had always been hers. You sure about this, boss? Tommy, the crew foreman, adjusted his hard hat and glanced toward the pristine colonial house next door. That lady's been watching us through her blinds for the past hour. Sarah's jaw tightened. I'm sure. She stepped out of the truck, her boots crunching on the gravel driveway of the modest ranch house she'd inherited 3 months ago when her Aunt Rosa finally passed. The house looked smaller than she remembered, weathered siding, overgrown garden. A far cry from the immaculate fortress that loomed beside it. But it was the pool that made her blood boil. The Henderson pool stretched across what should have been her backyard, an elaborate kidney-shaped oasis complete with a waterfall feature, perfectly manicured landscaping, and a deck that gleamed like it had been installed yesterday. Because it probably had been. Another renovation in an endless series of improvements Mrs. Eleanor Henderson had made to property that wasn't entirely hers. Sarah Martinez. The voice cut through her fury like a rusty blade. She turned to see Eleanor Henderson emerging from her back door, dressed in crisp white linen despite the early hour. At 72, Eleanor still carried herself with the imperious bearing of someone who'd never been told no, her silver hair styled in a perfect bob, her manicured fingers already reaching for the phone in her pocket. It's Mrs. Martinez now. Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Eleanor's laugh was sharp, brittle. Still harboring grudges after all these years? How quaint. She gestured toward the excavation equipment. I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is private property. My property. Actually, Sarah pulled a manila folder from her truck. That's where you're wrong. The surveyor's report crinkled in the morning breeze as she unfolded it. Red lines marked clear boundaries, measurements precise to the inch. Eleanor's pool, her beautiful, expensive pool, sat squarely on Martina's land. This is ridiculous, Eleanor snapped, but Sarah caught the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. I've owned this property for 40 years. I have deeds, tax records. You have deeds to your house and the immediate yard, Sarah interrupted, stepping closer. But this section. She gestured to the area where the pool sparkled in the morning light. This has always belonged to my family. My grandmother Rosa just never enforced the property line because she was too kind, too trusting. Eleanor's face flushed red. Your aunt was a drunk who couldn't keep up with her own property taxes. I maintained this land. I improved it. You stole it. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and final. Sarah could see Eleanor's mind racing, probably calculating legal costs, wondering how this could be happening. Tommy, Sarah called without breaking eye contact with Eleanor. Start with the decking. The roar of machinery filled the air as the crew moved into position. Eleanor's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air before she found her voice again. You can't do this. I'll call the police. Go ahead, Sarah said, settling into a lawn chair she'd brought specifically for this moment. Tell them someone's removing structures from their own property. Eleanor's fingers flew across her phone screen, but Sarah could see the doubt creeping in. 40 years of assumed ownership crumbling as fast as the deck planks now being loaded. Into the dumpster. This is Eleanor Henderson at 47 Maple Street. Eleanor's voice rose to near hysteria as she spoke into her phone. Someone is destroying my pool. Send someone immediately. Sarah watched impassively as the waterfall feature came down next, chunks of artificial rock tumbling into the growing pile of debris. Each crash felt like a small victory, a piece of justice finally served. They're on their way, Eleanor hissed, pocketing her phone. And when they get here, they'll arrest you for vandalism and trespassing. Will they? Sarah's voice was ice cold. Because I seem to remember another time you called the police. Do you remember, Mrs. Henderson? I was 12 years old. Eleanor's face went pale. It was summer. Hot, just like today. My grandmother had finally saved enough money to put in a little above-ground pool for me and my cousins. Nothing fancy. Just a blue circle of happiness in our backyard. The excavator's arm swung wide, demolishing the pool's filtration system with surgical precision. We'd been swimming for maybe an hour when you came marching over in your designer sundress, screaming about property values and keeping up standards in the neighborhood. You said we were too loud, too ethnic, that our music was inappropriate. Eleanor opened her mouth to speak, but Sarah cut her off. Then you called the city inspectors. Made up stories about permits and safety violations. They made us drain the pool, take it down. My grandmother spent her life savings on that pool. And you destroyed it with a phone call. That was different, was it? Sarah stood up, her voice gaining strength. Because what I remember is a 12-year-old girl who never got to swim in her own backyard again. I remember my grandmother crying over the kitchen table, trying to figure out how to pay the fines you generated with your complaints. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the morning air. Eleanor's face brightened with vindictive satisfaction. Here they come. I hope you have a good lawyer, because I'm going to sue you for everything you're worth. Sarah smiled for the first time. All morning. You might want to save your money for your own legal fees. 2 patrol cars pulled into the driveway, and Sarah recognized Officer Martinez, no relation, despite the name, climbing out of the lead vehicle. She'd gone to school with his younger brother. Morning, ladies. Officer Martinez approached cautiously, taking in the scene of destruction. We got a call about property damage. Yes. Eleanor rushed toward him, her voice shrill with righteousness. This woman is destroying my pool. Arrest her. Officer Martinez looked at Sarah, recognition dawning in his eyes. Sarah Martinez? Haven't seen you since Rosa's funeral. Sorry for your loss. Thank you, Miguel. Eleanor's eyes darted between them, suspicion replacing confidence. You know each other. Small town, Sarah said simply, then handed Miguel the surveyor's report. Miguel, Mrs. Henderson seems to be confused about property lines. The pool she's claiming is hers is actually sitting on land that belongs to me. Miguel studied the documents, his expression growing more serious with each page. He addressed Eleanor. Do you have your property deed with you? Of course I do. Eleanor stormed back toward her house, her composure finally cracking. This is outrageous. I know my rights. While Eleanor was gone, Miguel leaned closer to Sarah. This is legit. Surveyed last month by Peterson and Associates. Triple-checked the county records myself. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. Miguel, she's been stealing from my family for decades, taking pieces of our property bit by bit, counting on us being too poor or too scared to fight back. Eleanor returned with a folder thick with documents, her hand shaking slightly as she thrust them at Miguel. Here. Everything's in order. You'll see. Miguel compared the 2 sets of documents, walking the property line marked by the surveyor stakes. His face grew grim as the evidence mounted. Mrs. Henderson, he said finally, I'm afraid the pool is on Ms. Martinez's property, by about 15 feet. That's impossible. Eleanor's voice cracked. I've been paying taxes on this land for 40 years. You've been paying taxes on your own property, Sarah said quietly. The county records show my family has been paying taxes on this section the entire time. Rosa never stopped paying, even when money was tight. Even when you tried to have us evicted for non-payment back in '98. Eleanor's face went ashen. How do you know about? I know everything, Mrs. Henderson. Every complaint you filed, every false report, every time you tried to drive us out so you could expand your little kingdom. Sarah's voice was steady, but her eyes blazed with decades of suppressed anger. I've spent the last 3 months researching, preparing. This is just the beginning. The second officer approached Miguel with a clipboard. Sir, I ran the address. Through the system. The Martinez family has clear title to this section. Always has. Eleanor grabbed Miguel's arm. But I improved the land. I maintained it. There are laws about adverse possession. Adverse possession requires the property to be abandoned or unused, Miguel said gently. The tax records show. Continuous payment by the Martinez family. Your improvements don't change the ownership. Sarah watched Eleanor's world collapse in real time. The woman who had terrorized her childhood, who had driven her grandmother. The emergency meeting of the Maple Street Homeowners Association convened at 7 p.m. sharp in Eleanor Henderson's living room, the same room where she'd orchestrated neighborhood politics for 4 decades. But tonight, Eleanor sat rigid in her wingback chair, her usual commanding presence replaced by barely contained panic. "This is absolutely unacceptable," declared Richard Blackwood, the association's treasurer and Eleanor's longtime ally. His face was flushed with indignation as he gestured toward the window overlooking the crater where the pool had been. "We cannot allow property values to plummet because of one person's vendetta." Sarah had anticipated this. From her position in the kitchen of her inherited house, she could see directly into Eleanor's living room through the window, a window that Eleanor had apparently forgotten existed when she'd chosen to hold this meeting. "The Martinez woman is clearly unstable," continued Patricia Moss, the association secretary. "First she disappears for 30 years, then she comes back and starts destroying established landscaping. Established theft," Sarah murmured to herself, adjusting the small recording device she'd placed near the window. Digital audio quality was remarkably good these days. Eleanor's voice cut through the group's murmurs, sharp with desperation. "We need to act quickly. I've spoken with my attorney, and there are ways to challenge this. Zoning violations, environmental concerns, disruption of established water drainage patterns." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her lawyer, David Chen. "Countershoot papers filed. Discovery phase begins Monday. Hope you're ready for this." She was more than ready. She'd spent 3 months preparing for every possible legal maneuver Eleanor might attempt. But what Eleanor didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Sarah had something far more devastating than property deeds and surveyor reports. She had Eleanor's secrets. "The first thing we need to do," Eleanor continued, her voice gaining strength, "is document every code violation on that property. The house is clearly not up to current standards. The septic system is probably failing. And I'm sure we can find structural issues, just like you did with the Gonzalez family." Sarah stepped through her back door, her voice carrying clearly across the small yard. The meeting fell silent. Through the window, Sarah could see everyone turning to stare at Eleanor, whose face had gone the color of ash. "I don't know what you're talking about," Eleanor managed, but her voice wavered. Sarah walked closer to the property line, her boots crunching on the debris from the demolished pool. "The Gonzalez family. Remember them, Mrs. Henderson? They lived where the Blackwoods live now. Sweet couple, 3 young children. Hector worked construction, Maria cleaned houses." "Sarah," Eleanor stood up, moving toward the window. "They made one mistake," Sarah continued, her voice carrying to the assembled group. "Maria asked you to keep your dog on a leash because it kept getting into their garden. You didn't like being told what to do by someone you considered beneath you." Eleanor's hand was pressed against the window now, her breath fogging the glass. "You need to stop this." "So you started a campaign. Anonymous complaints to code enforcement. Reports to immigration services. You even called CPS and claimed the children were being neglected." Sarah's voice rose, carrying across the quiet evening air. "Want to know how I know all this?" The silence from Eleanor's living room was deafening. Sarah held up a thick manila envelope. Hector Gonzalez kept everything. Every false complaint, every harassment letter, every legal document generated by your campaign to drive them out. And when he died last year, his son gave me this. Eleanor's face crumpled. "How do you?" "Because Hector Jr. is my research assistant at the university," Sarah said simply. Small world, isn't it? When he found out I was Rosa Martinez's niece, he had some very interesting stories to share. Patricia Moss's voice drifted through the window. "Eleanor, what is she talking about?" Eleanor spun away from the window, facing her allies with wild eyes. "She's lying. The Gonzalez family moved away because they couldn't afford the mortgage. They lost their house because you got Hector fired from 3 different jobs," Sarah called out. "You called his employers with anonymous tips about his immigration status. Legal immigrant, by the way. Had his green card for 15 years. Richard Blackwood's face appeared at the window next to Eleanor's. "This is ridiculous." We should. Call the police. Please do, Sarah smiled. I'd love to discuss this with Officer Martinez again, especially since I just filed a civil rights complaint with the county about a pattern of discriminatory harassment targeting Latino families in this neighborhood. The meeting erupted in chaos. Sarah could hear voices rising, chairs scraping, people demanding answers that Eleanor clearly couldn't provide. But Sarah wasn't done. Oh, and Mrs. Henderson? Tomorrow morning, the county assessor is coming to reevaluate property lines for the entire street. Seems there might be some discrepancies in multiple property deeds. Eleanor's scream of rage could probably be heard 3 blocks away. By 9 p.m., the meeting had dissolved into accusations and denials. Sarah watched from her kitchen as car after car pulled out of Eleanor's driveway, leaving the older woman standing alone in her doorway, silhouetted against the harsh porch light. Sarah's phone rang. Ms. Martinez? This is James Crawford from Crawford, Henderson and Associates. Sarah recognized the name, Eleanor's lawyer. Working late, Mr. Crawford. Ms. Martinez, I'm calling to discuss a reasonable settlement to this property dispute. My client is prepared to be generous. Your client is prepared to be desperate, Sarah interrupted. How generous are we talking? Mrs. Henderson is willing to deed the disputed property to you officially, along with a payment of $50,000 for the inconvenience and emotional distress this situation has caused. Sarah laughed. $50,000? Mr. Crawford, do you know what that pool cost to build? A pause. I believe it was around $200,000, including the landscaping. Plus 40 years of property taxes she should have been paying on land she didn't own. Plus punitive damages for harassment. Plus the cost of my grandmother's legal fees from all those frivolous complaints. Sarah's voice turned cold. Your client doesn't have enough money to settle this, Mr. Crawford. Ms. Martinez, I strongly advise you to consider this offer. Litigation can be expensive and unpredictable. I'm not settling, Sarah said firmly. This goes to court, where Mrs. Henderson can explain under oath why she spent 4 decades terrorizing immigrant families in this neighborhood. The line went quiet for a long moment. Ms. Martinez, what exactly do you want? Sarah looked out her window at Eleanor's house, where the lights were burning in every room despite the late hour. I want justice, Mr. Crawford. And I want the truth. She hung up and immediately called David Chen. They offered to settle, she told him. How much? $50,000 plus the property deed. David whistled. That's actually not terrible for a property dispute, David. They offered to settle before we've even filed discovery motions, before we've deposed a single witness. What does that tell you? A pause. That they're terrified of what we might find. Exactly. Sarah walked to her kitchen table, where she'd spread out decades of documents, photos, and records. Eleanor, Henderson has been running a one-woman ethnic cleansing campaign in this neighborhood for 40 years. The Gonzalez family was just the beginning. She pulled out a photograph from 1995, a street festival on Maple Street, families gathered around picnic tables, children playing in the street. Sarah's finger traced over the faces. The Gonzalez family, the Pham family, the Al-Rashid family, the Johnsons, the Martinez family. Look at this neighborhood in 1995. David. Look at the diversity, the community. Now look at it today. David had seen the current photos. Maple Street was now exclusively white, affluent, and silent. No children played in the streets. No families gathered for impromptu celebrations. How many families, Sarah? 17. Sarah's voice was steady, but her hand shook slightly as she pulled out file after file. 17 families driven out by Eleanor Henderson's systematic campaign of harassment, false complaints, and economic sabotage. All people of color. All working-class families who had the audacity to think they belonged in her neighborhood. And you can prove this. Sarah gestured to the mountains of evidence covering her table. I can prove all of it. Every complaint, every lie, every life she destroyed. And tomorrow, when that county assessor shows up, Eleanor Henderson is going to discover that she's not the only one who's been lying about property lines. What do you mean? Sarah pulled out one final document, a property survey from 1962, yellowed with age and stamped with official seals. Eleanor Henderson doesn't just not own the land her pool was on, David. She doesn't own half the property she thinks she does. Her house, her garage, her precious rose garden, all of it sitting on land that belongs to other people. The implications hit David immediately. Jesus, Sarah. If this gets out, every family she drove away has grounds for massive lawsuits. Civil rights violations, intentional infliction of emotional distress, conspiracy, interference with business relations, the list goes on. Sarah's smile was sharp as a blade. And the best part? She's asset-rich but cash-poor. That house, that property, those improvements she's so proud of, it's all she has. You're going to destro. Sarah woke at dawn to the sound of engines running. Through her bedroom window, she watched a moving truck back into Eleanor's driveway, followed by a luxury sedan with tinted windows. Eleanor was running. Sarah dressed quickly and stepped onto her front porch, coffee in hand, as if she was simply enjoying the morning air. She didn't have to wait long. Sarah. Eleanor's voice cracked across the distance between their houses. The older woman stood in her doorway, still wearing yesterday's dirt-stained clothes, her perfectly styled hair now a wild mess. We need to talk. I'm listening, Sarah called back, not moving from her porch. Eleanor looked frantically at the moving crew loading boxes into the truck, then back at Sarah. Privately. Sarah set down her coffee and walked slowly across the yards, noting how Eleanor's hand shook as she clutched something against her chest, the metal box from last night. Going somewhere, Mrs. Henderson. I'm taking a vacation, Eleanor said, but her voice was hollow. Extended vacation. Maybe permanent. Running away isn't going to make your legal problems disappear. Eleanor's laugh was bitter. Legal problems? You have no idea what you've stumbled into. She held up the metal box. You want to know the truth about this neighborhood? About why I fought so hard to keep certain families away? Sarah's pulse quickened. I'm listening. Eleanor's eyes darted toward the moving truck, then back to Sarah. Not here. Too many ears. She gestured toward the small gazebo in what had been the shared backyard space. 5 minutes. Just you and me. Sarah followed, her phone already, recording in her pocket. Eleanor sat heavily on the gazebo bench, the metal box balanced on her knees like her explosive device. Do you know what Maple Street was before it was Maple Street? Eleanor asked. Farmland. The Kowalski farm. Before that. Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. Before the houses, before the development, before your precious family moved here. Sarah said nothing, sensing that Eleanor was about to reveal something massive. Eleanor opened the metal box with trembling fingers. Inside were documents, photographs, and what looked like financial records. She pulled out a black and white photograph from the 1940s. This was a sundown town, Sarah. Do you know what that means? Sarah's blood went cold. Sundown towns, communities that forced African Americans and other minorities to leave by sunset or face violence. She'd studied them in graduate school, but she'd never imagined. Maple Heights wasn't just farmland, Eleanor continued, her voice gaining strength as she pulled out more documents. It was a planned community. Whites only. Built specifically to keep out undesirables. Eleanor handed Sarah a copy of the original neighborhood covenant from 1952. The language was stark, brutal in its clarity. No persons of African, Asian, Hispanic, or Jewish descent shall own, lease, or occupy any property within the boundaries of Maple Heights subdivision. These covenants were declared illegal in 1968, Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. Illegal, yes, but not forgotten. Eleanor pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. My husband's family were the original developers. The Hendersons built this neighborhood as a white sanctuary, and we've been protecting it ever since. Sarah felt sick. Protecting it by terrorizing families? By driving out anyone who doesn't fit your racist vision? By maintaining property, values? Eleanor snapped. By preserving the community we built. Do you have any idea what happens to neighborhoods when they become diverse? They become communities instead of segregated compounds. Eleanor's eyes flashed with anger. They become worthless. Crime increases, schools decline, property values plummet. Everything my family worked for, destroyed. Sarah stared at the documents in her hands, deed restrictions, homeowner association bylaws, correspondence between Eleanor and various city officials. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. The Gonzalez family, Sarah said slowly. The Fams. The Al-Rashids. You didn't just harass them. You orchestrated their removal to maintain your little whites-only paradise. I maintained the neighborhood's character, Eleanor said defensively. I preserved what my husband's family created. You violated federal civil rights laws. 4 decades. Eleanor's composure cracked completely. You think I wanted this? You think I enjoyed making those calls, filing those complaints? I did what was necessary to protect our investment. Sarah pulled out her phone, stopping the recording. Mrs. Henderson, do you realize what you just confessed to? Eleanor's face went ashen as she realized what she'd done. You were recording. Every word. Sarah stood up, the documents clutched in her hands. Conspiracy to commit civil rights. Violations. Housing discrimination. Intentional infliction of emotional distress on 17 families. The Justice Department is going to be very interested in this. Wait. Eleanor grabbed Sarah's arm. You don't understand the full picture. It wasn't just me. The city council, the police department, the school board, they were all part of it. If you expose this, you'll destroy dozens of careers, hundreds of families. Good. Eleanor's grip tightened. Sarah, please. I can make this right. The settlement offer, I'll double it, triple it. You can have whatever you want, just, please don't destroy everything. Sarah looked down at Eleanor's desperate face, then at the documents. That proved decades of systematic racism. What I want, Mrs. Henderson, is justice for every family you drove away. And I want to make sure this never happens again. You'll destroy the entire town. Property values will collapse. The school district will lose funding. Businesses will. Close. Then maybe it deserves to be destroyed. Sarah pulled free from Eleanor's grip and started walking back toward her house. Behind her, Eleanor's sobs turned to rage. You don't know what you're doing. Eleanor screamed. Some of those families left for good reasons. Some of them were dangerous, criminal. Sarah spun around. Like the Gonzalez family? Hector worked construction for 20 years without a single complaint. Maria volunteered at the school library. Their kids were honor students. Like the Johnson family then. Eleanor's voice was shrill with desperation. Michael Johnson was dealing drugs. Michael Johnson was a pharmacist who worked night shifts at the hospital. The drug dealing was him bringing work home. Sarah's voice was deadly quiet. I know, because I looked up every single family you drove away. Every lie you told, every life you ruined. Eleanor staggered backward as if she'd been struck. How could you possibly know? Because unlike you, I believe in truth. Sarah held up the documents. And the truth is that every family you targeted was chosen for one reason only, the color of their skin. The moving truck's horn honked impatiently. Eleanor looked back at her house, then at Sarah, then at the box of evidence that had sealed. Her fate. There's more, Eleanor said desperately. Things you don't know. The reason I kept the pool exactly where it wasn't just hiding the property line. There are other things buried there. Things that would destroy more than just me. Sarah paused. What things? Eleanor glanced around nervously, then leaned closer. The original development contracts. Financial records showing who funded the whites-only covenant. Names, dates, bank transfers. A paper trail leading to some very powerful people who are still alive, still in positions of authority. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. You're talking about current officials? People still in government. The mayor's father was one of the original investors. The county commissioner's family provided the legal framework. The police chief's grandfather was the enforcer who made sure undesirable families got the message. Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. Sarah, if you expose this, you won't just be fighting me. You'll be fighting the entire power structure of this town. Sarah's mind raced. This explained so much, why her family's complaints had never been taken seriously, why the police had always sided with Eleanor, why the city had been so quick to issue violations against minority families. Where are these documents now? Eleanor gestured toward the crater where her pool had been. Still buried. The metal box only contained my personal copies. The real evidence is in a waterproof container about 10 feet down, right where your excavator stopped digging. Sarah stared at the destruction site, understanding flooding through her. You built the pool specifically to hide the evidence. To protect it, Eleanor corrected. My husband knew this day might come. He knew someone might eventually challenge the system we'd built. The pool was insurance. Insurance against what? Eleanor's smile was bitter. Against people like you. People who believe that justice matters more than order. People who would rather burn down a system than preserve it. The moving truck honked again, more insistently. Eleanor looked back at her house with something like grief. I'm leaving, Sarah. Today. I suggest you think very carefully about whether you want to dig up the rest of those documents. Because once you do, there's no going back. This town will never forgive you for destroying their perfect little world. And if I don't? Eleanor pulled out a check from her purse, already filled out. $1 million. The property deed to the disputed land. And a signed confession taking full responsibility for the harassment campaigns. Just me, acting alone, no conspiracy, no other parties involved. Sarah stared at the check. $1 million would solve every financial problem she'd ever had. It would let her move anywhere, start over. The mayor's office felt like a tomb. Heavy oak paneling absorbed sound, thick curtains blocked the afternoon sun, and the air itself seemed weighted with decades of decisions made in shadows. Sarah sat across from Mayor Richard Davidson, a man whose family name graced half the street signs in town, while the county commissioner, police chief, and city attorney formed a semicircle of intimidation around her. Ms. Martinez, Mayor Davidson began, his voice carrying the smooth authority of inherited power, I understand you've come into possession of some historical documents. Sarah's lawyer, David Chen, squeezed her arm in warning, but she met the mayor's gaze steadily. I've come into possession of evidence of systematic civil rights violations spanning 4 decades. Historical curiosities, interjected Commissioner Janet Walsh, her smile sharp as broken glass. Neighborhood covenants from a different era. Completely unenforceable, legally meaningless. Murder was illegal in the 1950s too, Sarah replied. That doesn't make historical murders meaningless. The police chief, a granite-faced man named Robert Torres, leaned forward. Ms. Martinez, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. Nobody's trying to suppress anything. We are offering you an opportunity to be reasonable. David Chen cleared his throat. What exactly are you offering? Mayor Davidson opened a folder on his desk. The city is prepared to purchase the Martinez property for fair market value, $2 million. Additionally, we'll establish a community development fund in Rosa Martinez's name. $5 million for neighborhood improvements, scholarships for underprivileged students, community programs. Sarah felt her breath catch. $7 million. More money than her family had seen in 3 generations. In exchange for? David asked. For Ms. Martinez's agreement to work with the city on a quiet, dignified resolution to this unfortunate situation, City Attorney Marcus Webb said smoothly. We acknowledge that mistakes were made in the past. Times were different. But destroying current families, current livelihoods, over historical grievances helps no one. Current families built on stolen land and racial terrorism, Sarah said quietly. Commissioner Walsh's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the steel beneath. Ms. Martinez, do you have any idea how many jobs depend on the stability of this community? The school district employs 300 people. Local businesses support thousands of families. Property taxes fund essential services across 3 counties. What Janet is saying, the mayor continued, is that your crusade would hurt innocent people, people who had nothing to do with past mistakes. Sarah looked around the room at these powerful people, all begging her to stay quiet, and felt a familiar rage building. Like the innocent families you drove away. Like the Gonzalez children who had to change schools 3 times because you kept getting their father fired. Like Maria Pham, who lost her house and had to move her elderly mother into a nursing home. She couldn't afford. That's ancient history, Commissioner Walsh began. That's ongoing criminal conspiracy. Sarah slammed her hand on the desk. And you're all part of it. The room fell silent. Police Chief Torres's hand moved unconsciously toward his radio. David Chen stood up, Gentlemen, lady, unless you're prepared to file charges against my client, I think this meeting is over. Sit down, Mr. Chen. Mayor Davidson's voice carried a new edge. Ms. Martinez, we've been very patient with you. Very generous. But patience has limits. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. The mayor opened another folder. Your property has some interesting issues. Structural problems that could require immediate condemnation. Environmental concerns that might necessitate expensive remediation. Zoning violations that could result in significant fines. Sarah felt ice in her veins. You're threatening to fabricate violations. I'm pointing out that properties often have problems when they're examined closely, Police Chief Torres said. Sometimes those problems require immediate action for public safety. The threat was clear. Submit or be destroyed by the same system that had terrorized 17 families before her. There's another issue, City Attorney Webb added, his voice deceptively gentle. Your employment at the state university. Academic positions are so precarious these days. Budget cuts, restructuring, performance reviews. David Chen's face went white. You're threatening her job. We are simply noting that controversy can be challenging for public employees, Webb replied smoothly. Sarah stared at these people, elected officials, sworn to serve the public, and saw them clearly for what they were, the inheritors and protectors of a racist conspiracy that had shaped her hometown for 70 years. Show them, Sarah said quietly. Sarah, David warned. Show them the recording. David reluctantly pulled out his phone and played the audio from Eleanor's confession that morning. As Eleanor's voice filled the room, describing the sundown, town origins and systematic harassment campaigns, Sarah watched the officials' faces carefully. No surprise. No shock. No outrage. They already knew everything. Well, Mayor Davidson said when the recording ended, Eleanor Henderson clearly suffered some kind of breakdown. Tragic, really. The stress of the property dispute, her advanced age. Mental health is such a serious issue, Commissioner Walsh added sympathetically. Poor woman obviously became delusional. Sarah felt something break inside her. You're going to claim she was lying? Even with documentary evidence. What documentary evidence? Police Chief Torres asked. I see a confused elderly woman making wild accusations against dead people who can't defend themselves. Sarah pulled Eleanor's documents from her briefcase and spread them across the mayor's desk. Original covenant papers, correspondence, financial records, 70 years of carefully preserved racism. Mayor Davidson barely glanced at them. Forgeries. Or at best, misunderstandings taken out of context by a disturbed woman. The handwriting analysis will prove. What handwriting analysis? City Attorney Webb smiled coldly. Ms. Martinez, those documents are stolen property. Taken from Eleanor Henderson's home without permission. Completely inadmissible in any court proceeding. Sarah's world tilted. She gave them to me voluntarily. According to whom? Eleanor Henderson is currently undergoing psychological evaluation at SD. Mary's Hospital. She's been deemed incompetent to make legal decisions. Webb's smile widened. Any documents allegedly obtained from her are fruit of the poisonous tree. David Chen grabbed Sarah's arm. We are leaving. Now. One more thing, Police Chief Torres called as they reached the door. Ms. Martinez, I should mention that we've received several complaints about suspicious activity at your property. Trespassing, possible theft of construction equipment, disturbance of a potential archaeological site. Archaeological site? Sarah spun around. Well, you did dig up some very old artifacts, Mayor Davidson said innocently. Historical preservation is so important. The state might need to conduct a full investigation of the site. Could take months. Maybe years. The trap was elegant and complete. They were going to tie up her property in bureaucratic red tape while simultaneously destroying her credibility, her career, and her ability to fight back. You can't do this, Sarah whispered. We are not doing anything, Commissioner Walsh said sweetly. We are simply following proper procedures to protect historical resources and ensure public safety. Sarah walked out of the mayor's office feeling like she'd been hit by a truck. In the parking lot, David Chen looked pale and shaken. Sarah, they're going to destroy you. They have the power to make your life impossible. They already made my life impossible, Sarah replied. They just waited 37 years to tell me about it. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check your email. Time sensitive. A friend. Sarah opened her email to find a message from an encrypted account with no identifying information. The subject line read, "The real burial site." The message contained GPS coordinates and a single line of text. Eleanor lied. The evidence isn't where she said. Meet me at Riverside Park, Pavilion 3, 1 hour. Come alone. Trust no one else. Sarah showed the message to David, who immediately shook his head. Absolutely not. This is obviously a trap. What if it's not? What if someone else knows the truth? Sarah, after what just happened in there, you can't trust anyone. These people have had 70 years to perfect their system. They're not going to let one professor with a property dispute bring them down. But as Sarah stared at the coordinates, something clicked. Riverside Park was where her grandmother Rosa used to take her as a child. Where Rosa would sit on a bench and stare across the river, sometimes crying for reasons she never explained. David, what if my grandmother knew? What if she knew all along where the real evidence was hidden? That's a hell of a gamble. Sarah looked back at the imposing City Hall building, where the most powerful people in the county had just threatened to destroy her life for demanding justice. Maybe, she said quietly, it's time to stop playing it safe. An hour later, Sarah sat alone in Pavilion 3 at Riverside Park, watching the sun set over the water where her grandmother used to bring her to feed the ducks. She'd told David she was going home, but some instinct, some connection to Rosa's memory, had drawn her here instead. Footsteps approached through the gathering dusk. Sarah tensed, ready to run, but the figure that emerged from a physical blow. The Henderson family didn't just build a whites-only neighborhood, Meja. They built it on stolen land. Land taken from Mexican families during the 1920s using fraudulent tax liens and forged documents. My grandfather, Alejandro Martinez, didn't sell his farm to the Hendersons. They stole it. And I can prove it. Miguel paused the recording and pulled out a waterproof case from beneath the pavilion bench. She hid this here 15 years ago, Sarah. Updated it every few months until she died. Inside were dozens of documents, original land deeds in Spanish, tax records showing mysterious transfers, photographs of families who had lived on the land before Maple Heights existed, and thick folders of correspondence between Rosa and various government agencies. Miguel, this is... Sarah's voice failed as she realized the scope of what she was looking at. Your family's original land grant from the Mexican government in 1847. 1,000 acres, including all of what's now Maple Heights, the downtown business district, and half the county courthouse. Miguel's voice was steady, but his hand shook. The Hendersons didn't just steal 40 square feet for a pool, Sarah. They stole an entire Mexican community. Sarah stared at a faded photograph from 1925. Dozens of Mexican families gathered for a harvest festival, their faces bright with joy, their children playing in fields that would soon become suburban lawns. Where did they all go? Miguel pressed play again. Rosa's voice filled the darkness. Some families were deported during the Depression, even though most were American citizens. Others were driven out by violence, houses burned, wells poisoned, livestock killed. The few families who stayed, like ours, were forced onto small parcels and told to be grateful we were allowed to remain at all. The covenant you found, Miguel explained, wasn't just about keeping new minorities out. It was about erasing the evidence that this had ever been a Mexican community. Sarah felt the world shifting beneath her feet. How many families? 237 families. Rosa documented every single one. Miguel pulled out a thick ledger, Rosa's careful handwriting filling page after page with names, dates, and stories. She spent 60 years tracking down descendants, collecting evidence, building a case. Why didn't she ever file suit? Miguel's laugh was bitter. She tried. Multiple times. But every lawyer she approached either refused the case or mysteriously withdrew after initial meetings. Every government agency told her the claims were too old, too complex, or referred her to offices that didn't exist. They were protecting the conspiracy. They were part of the conspiracy. Miguel pulled out another folder, this one containing recent documents. Sarah, Your grandmother didn't just document historical theft. She documented ongoing theft. Current city officials have been systematically transferring public land to private developers, using the same fraudulent methods their ancestors used in the 1920s. Sarah opened the folder to find copies of recent land transfers, zoning decisions, and development contracts. The pattern was clear: valuable public land being sold to connected developers for pennies on the dollar, then developed into exclusive communities that maintained the same exclusionary practices that had defined Maple Heights for 70 years. The Riverside Development Project, Sarah read from one document. The new luxury shopping center on what used to be Riverside Park. Built on land that legally belongs to the descendants of Mexican families your great-grandfather fought alongside in the Mexican-American War, Miguel confirmed. Rosa traced the ownership back to the original land grants. The recording continued, Rosa's voice growing stronger. I never told Sarah the truth because I wanted her to have a normal life, away from this hatred. But I always knew she would come back. She has her great-grandfather's fighting spirit, and this fight is bigger than what happened to our family. This is about justice for hundreds of families who never got to tell their stories. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. Miguel, if this is all true, the financial implications are staggering, Miguel finished. Current market value of the stolen land is over $2 billion. Factor in damages, interest, and punitive awards for civil rights violations. And you're looking at enough money to bankrupt not just the conspirators, but the entire county government. Which is why they're so desperate to stop me. Miguel nodded grimly. And why they'll kill to protect their secret. A car engine rumbled in the distance, growing closer. Miguel immediately stood, his hand moving to his weapon. We need to go. Now. But it was too late. Floodlights blazed to life around the pavilion, and Sarah found herself surrounded by police cars. Chief Torres stepped out of the lead vehicle, flanked by officers Sarah didn't recognize. Officer Martinez, Torres, called out, his voice carrying across the water. Step away from the suspect. Miguel didn't move. Chief, Ms. Martinez isn't under arrest. She is now. Torres held up a warrant. Theft of public records, destruction of historical artifacts, conspiracy to defraud the city government. Sarah looked at the documents spread across the pavilion. Table, evidence that could destroy the conspiracy, and realized they were about to be confiscated and buried forever. Miguel, she whispered, the recording. Miguel's hand closed around the device. Trust me. Officer Martinez, Torres's voice was ice cold. That's evidence in a criminal investigation. Hand it over. Miguel looked at Sarah, then at his chief, then at the circle of officers surrounding them. For a moment, Sarah thought he was going to surrender. Instead, he pressed a button on his radio. All units, this is Officer Martinez requesting immediate backup at Riverside Park. Multiple shots fired, officer down, suspects fleeing. Chaos erupted. Torres screamed into his own radio, trying to countermand the false emergency call, but it was too late. Every police officer in the county was now racing toward their location. Run, Miguel told Sarah. Take the documents and run. I'm not leaving you. You have to. This evidence dies with us if we don't get it to the right people. Miguel drew his weapon, pointing it at Torres. Go. Now. Sarah grabbed the case of documents and sprinted into the darkness as sirens wailed from every direction. Behind her, she could hear Miguel shouting into his radio, maintaining the fiction of an officer-down emergency to buy her time. She ran through the woods bordering the park, branches tearing at her clothes, the precious case clutched to her chest. She had to get the evidence to safety. Had to. Her phone rang. David Chen. Sarah, where are you? The police just raided your house. David, listen carefully. I have evidence. Real evidence. Rosa left it for me. Sarah, you need to turn yourself in. They're saying you attacked a police officer. They're lying. David, this goes all the way back to the founding of the town. Hundreds of Mexican families had their land stolen, and the current city government is continuing the same. The line went dead. Sarah looked at her phone. No signal. They were jamming communications. She was alone in the dark with evidence that could topple a conspiracy spanning a century, and they were hunting her like an animal. But Rosa's voice echoed in her memory. She has her great-grandfather's fighting spirit. Sarah Martinez had spent 37 years running from this town and its buried secrets. Tonight, she stopped running. She pulled out the burner phone Rosa had hidden in the document case, her grandmother's final gift, and dialed the number written on a slip of paper tucked inside. Washington Post investigative desk, a voice answered. This is Sarah Martinez. I have evidence of the largest municipal land fraud conspiracy in American history. I'm being hunted by corrupt police, and I need immediate help. A pause. Can you verify? Rosa Martinez has been feeding your paper tips for 15 years about corruption in Maple Heights. She told you someday her granddaughter would call with the full story. Another pause, longer this time. Dr. Martinez? We've been waiting for your call. As police sirens wailed through the night and searchlights swept the woods, Sarah Martinez smiled for the first time in days. Rosa had planned for everything, including this moment. The conspiracy that had shaped her hometown for a century was about to be exposed to the world. And this time, no amount of money or power or violence could bury the truth. Because the truth, Sarah realized, had never been buried at all. It had been growing in the dark for 70 years, gaining strength with every injustice, every family driven away, every life destroyed by hatred and greed. And now, finally, it was ready to break into the light. 6 months later, Sarah Martinez stood in the ruins of Eleanor Henderson's former house, watching federal agents carry out boxes of evidence. The Washington Post investigation had triggered a Justice Department task force that uncovered the largest municipal corruption scandal in American history. Mayor Davidson was serving 25 years in federal prison. Commissioner Walsh had plea bargained for 15. Police Chief Torres had fled to a non-extradition country, but not before Miguel Martinez's recording of their confrontation had made him a national symbol of police corruption. The city government had collapsed entirely, replaced by a federal oversight commission tasked with redistributing stolen land to its rightful owners. And Eleanor Henderson? She had died quietly in her sleep 3 days after Sarah found roses. Evidence, her lawyer revealing in her posthumous statement that she had spent 40 years trying to fire.